Caroline's daughter's graduation party was nearly ruined when the HOA suddenly capped her guest list and threatened $500 fines. Behind it all stood Darren Fisk, a smug board member with a personal grudge and a taste for control. But Caroline had a quiet ally in the state health department, and Darren's pool party wasn't as regulation compliant as he thought. Just wait until you hear how the tables turned, and how justice came with whistles, citations, and one unforgettable backyard barbecue. For Caroline Miles, the backyard was more than just a patch of grass. It was the heart of her home. It had seen birthday cakes, sparklers, late-night talks, and now, after 3 years of her youngest daughter, Amber, grinding through remote classes, canceled dances, and a lonely senior year, it was finally going to host something joyful, a proper graduation celebration. Caroline had spent weeks organizing every detail. Amber's uncles were flying in from Chicago. Her great-aunt Linda, who hadn't traveled in years, had booked a bus ticket just to surprise her. Caroline had even splurged on Amber's favorite local taco truck and arranged for a small folk band, kids from the community college, to play on a portable stage. It wasn't extravagant, just full of heart. The guest list hovered around 40 people. Family, a few neighbors, Amber's classmates. It was all set for Friday evening, lights strung through the trees, tablecloths folded, coolers stocked. Then Friday morning came. At 9:17 a.m., Caroline heard the knock, sharp and deliberate. When she opened the door, she found 3 men in matching HOA polos standing stiffly on her porch. One of them, Darren Fisk, stepped forward with a clipboard tucked under his arm and the kind of grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning, Mrs. Miles," he said, already flipping pages. "We're here about a violation of Section 9.2 of the Meadow Trails Community Standards. It pertains to unauthorized large gatherings." Caroline blinked. "Excuse me?" He read aloud with practiced authority. "No homeowner shall host a gathering exceeding 12 individuals on residential property without prior written approval from the HOA board, requested no less than 14 days in advance." Her mouth opened, then closed. "That's never been enforced," she said, her voice tight. "There have been weddings on this street, baby showers, block parties." Darren didn't look up. "Starting this quarter, the board has decided to apply the standard more consistently. Failure to comply will result in a per-person violation fee of $500 per guest over the approved limit. Additional violations may be reported to county enforcement as trespassing." Caroline stared at him. "You're kidding." "No, ma'am," Darren said coolly. "We've already observed multiple tables set up and a commercial vendor vehicle parked near your back gate. We consider that an active setup." She could feel the heat rising in her chest. "The taco truck hasn't even turned on their burners yet." Still, he handed her a yellow slip of paper. It wasn't handwritten. It had her name, address, the section number, and the date already filled out, pre-printed like they had expected her to violate something. It wasn't about rules. It was about control. And they had come with the intent to make her pay for something she hadn't even done yet. As they walked off without another word, Caroline stood frozen in her doorway, the notice in her hand fluttering slightly in the breeze. Her phone buzzed. Her cousin was texting to ask if it was still okay to bring her toddler. Caroline didn't know what to reply. That was the moment the celebration shifted, not because of weather or illness or budget, but because a petty man with a clipboard decided to weaponize a technicality, and he wasn't done yet. By 5 p.m., the backyard felt like a graveyard of folded chairs and wasted effort. Caroline had spent the afternoon making phone calls she never thought she'd have to make. Her voice stayed polite, apologetic, but each cancellation twisted the knife deeper. She had to tell her cousin Amy not to come. Then her sister. Then the Carsons, neighbors who had already picked up a birthday cake for Amber to surprise her. The worst call was to Aunt Linda. At 84, Linda had packed a suitcase 3 days early and set a reminder on her old rotary phone just to be ready on time. When Caroline gently explained the situation, something vague about unexpected restrictions, the line fell silent. Then the sniffles came. "But I got her a quilt," Aunt Linda whispered. Caroline bit her lip and promised to visit soon. She hung up, leaned against the fridge, and stared out the kitchen window, where the backyard still stood, dressed for a party that wouldn't happen. Inside, Amber had locked herself in her room. Caroline had knocked once. No answer. She didn't blame her. And across the neighborhood, less than 5 blocks away, came the steady pulse of bass from the HOA clubhouse. Music thumping, people laughing, the scent of grilled food wafting through the trees. Darren Fisk was there. He wasn't hiding or even pretending to be fair. In fact, Caroline's neighbor Jill texted her a photo of him lounging poolside in mirrored sunglasses with 2 other board members. The caption read, "No attendance cap over here. Darren says cheers." Apparently, they were calling it the HOA Memorial Mixer. Flyers had been posted online just hours after Caroline received her violation. No guest limit, no approval forms, just drinks, dancing, and exactly the kind of gathering she dreamed of for her daughter. Later that evening, Jill called with something worse. "I overheard Darren laughing with someone. He said, 'At least our event won't be ruined by out-of-towners and screaming kids.'" Caroline stood at her sink, the empty taco truck deposit receipt still on the counter, and stared out at the paper lanterns she hadn't taken down. Her rage wasn't the kind that boiled over. It was the kind that condensed, heavy and precise, into something cold and focused. She knew exactly why this happened. Last October, Darren had run for re-election as HOA president. Caroline had led the charge against his street parking crackdown, organizing neighbors to vote him out in favor of a more flexible policy. Darren lost, badly. And Caroline, she became a symbol of that shift, the mom who stood up and won. Now, it was clear, this wasn't about Section 9.2 or party sizes. This was personal. She didn't need to guess at his motives anymore. Darren had used his position to hit her where it hurt, through paperwork, rules, and calculated humiliation. And then she remembered. 2 months earlier, during an HOA budget meeting, Darren had bragged, smug and unfiltered, that the clubhouse pool hadn't been officially inspected in over a decade. He waved it off, saying the facility was grandfathered in and didn't need to play by the same rules as other public venues. Caroline hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now she remembered every word, and suddenly her anger had a direction. Caroline didn't sleep much that night. After the canceled party, after wiping away Amber's silent tears and folding the untouched tablecloths, she sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of cold tea, staring blankly at the HOA notice still lying on the counter. But something inside her had settled. Not peace, not acceptance, something else, like a lever had clicked into place. She reached for her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Greg Monroe, her brother-in-law. Married to her sister for almost 15 years, Greg wasn't just family. He was also a senior inspector for the state's public health division, specifically in aquatic facility compliance. She didn't even explain the full story. She didn't need to. The moment Caroline mentioned the HOA pool, the 60-plus person event, and the grandfathered clause Darren had bragged about, Greg's voice dropped into something firm and professional. "Send me everything," he said. "Flyer, photos, times, whatever you've got. I'll file a complaint under general public interest." She did. Every detail. Jill had sent her a short video of the previous night's music blaring across the clubhouse deck. Another neighbor shared an overhead drone shot showing the crowd density. And Caroline still had the exact wording Darren used in that meeting. She remembered it verbatim. Greg submitted a formal audit request to the county health office Saturday morning, citing anonymous reports of chlorine mismanagement, overcapacity use, and potentially hazardous crowding at a shared-use aquatic facility. The department moved quickly. By Sunday afternoon, while Caroline watered her hydrangeas and tried not to look toward the clubhouse, she could hear it again, bass-heavy music thumping through the trees. Laughter, the clink of drinks. Over 60 people. Easy. More cars lined the curb than she'd ever seen before. And then, just before 4 p.m., a clean white SUV turned the corner and rolled slowly toward the clubhouse entrance. The state seal gleamed faintly in the sunlight. 3 inspectors in polos stepped out with clipboards and carry kits. No fanfare, no warning. They moved with the kind of purposeful calm that made people nervous before they even spoke. Caroline stayed where she was, just barely in view from her porch, arms crossed gently. She watched as the officials entered the gated area and gave a sharp 2-note whistle that cut across the music. Conversations halted. The DJ hesitated. One inspector raised a hand and spoke loud enough to carry, "This is a state health inspection. All guests must vacate the pool area immediately." People looked at one another, confused, then scattered like a spilled box of puzzle pieces. Folding chairs scraped. Flip-flops slapped on wet concrete. A child dropped a beach ball, which bobbed sadly in the water. And Darren Fisk? He was in the shallow end, shirtless, blinking through the sun, with a red Solo cup in hand. He tried to bluster. "This is private property. We have permits for—" The lead inspector cut him off with practiced calm. "Sir, we've received multiple credible reports. Your facility lacks chemical logs, safety signage is non-compliant, and the event today exceeds the posted maximum occupancy, which, I should note, is missing entirely from your entry gate." Darren stood frozen, dripping and speechless, as a citation was clipped to the clubhouse's main door. Another inspector read through his clipboard and listed off everything the board had failed to do. Items that would have taken a single afternoon to fix if they'd ever bothered to follow regulations. Caroline didn't cheer. She didn't smile. She simply went back inside, poured herself a fresh glass of iced tea, and texted Jill, "You might want to cancel your swim plans for next week." The final report came later that night. Facility suspended. Pool closed until further notice. Future gatherings to require county permit and certified chemical tracking logs. The same board that had weaponized rules against Caroline now found itself tangled in its own red tape, and she hadn't even raised her voice. By Monday morning, the story had already made its way into every kitchen and front yard conversation in Meadow Trails. Neighbors who had never cared about HOA policy were suddenly quoting health code violations and referencing state regulations like experts. The inspection report had been posted on the county health department's website, Public Record, and someone, nobody knew exactly who, had taken a photo of Darren Fisk standing dripping wet in his board shorts, arms crossed like a sulking teenager, while a health inspector no taller than 5'2" read him the full list of code infractions. That photo spread fast. First via group texts, then the neighborhood Facebook page. One resident jokingly captioned it, "When you enforce the rules but forget to follow them." Caroline didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The tide had turned. By Tuesday, attendance at the monthly HOA meeting tripled. But this time, it wasn't the usual crowd of quiet head nods and dry policy readings. People stood up, calmly, firmly, and asked questions, real questions, about accountability, about transparency, about fairness. A petition to formally censure the current board circulated that night. It gathered 112 signatures in just 2 days, and by the end of the week, Darren Fisk had resigned, citing personal reasons. His exit email was short and unsigned. No farewell, no thanks, just silence. But what came next was something even more unexpected. Caroline had barely spoken about what happened. She didn't need applause. All she wanted was for Amber to feel celebrated, not collateral. And her neighbors knew that. So, the following Saturday, without fanfare or official announcement, folding tables started appearing in Caroline's yard again, only this time she hadn't put them there. Her neighbors had. They brought side dishes, drinks, decorations, even balloons with Amber's name hand-painted across them. Jill showed up with ribs. The Carsons brought a giant sheet cake that read, "Second time's the charm." Someone else brought back the same folk band that had been scheduled before. And this time they played on the front porch, under strings of donated lights. Amber stepped outside and froze when she saw it. No rules, no forms, no cap on guests, just people. Laughing, hugging, dancing barefoot in the grass. The same people who'd once stayed quiet at HOA meetings were now dancing next to Caroline's flower beds and handing Amber graduation cards with handwritten notes inside. And that night, as the sun set over the backyard that had once felt like a battleground, Caroline finally exhaled. She hadn't won by yelling louder or fighting dirtier. She'd won by outlasting the pettiness with grace and reminding the neighborhood what community really meant. Not silence, but standing together and celebrating anyway.